What an amazing turnaround in the Asian equity session. What do you make of it as an opportunity to sell into this strength?
Well, there's been such an avalanche of bad news, so I think it was heading up for it became very sensitive to any bit of good news, and that's what's happened. Unfortunately, those medium-term problems out in markets are still with us, so it's hard to argue that this is a real turn for the better and that it's going to be sustained.
What would convince you? Because you're right. I mean, in the space of 48 hours, what has really changed since Thursday, Friday? But how bad is global growth? What is your perspective? Are we through the worst of it? I was reading notes yesterday afternoon going, look, possibly we're through the worst of this panic about banks. We're through the worst, really, of these huge drawdown in equity markets. A bear market has been done on the MSCI World Index. Where do you think we are in the cycle?
I think the panic probably was overdone. But there's no question that post-crisis we have really struggled in terms of delivering decent rates of growth, and the problems have worsened. So there are stronger headwinds now in growth and inflation, and it's that dratted number, nominal GDP, that you should be looking at on a global basis, with inflation hovering around zero, real growth weakening. There's not much there in terms of growth, and that is what affects business sales. That is what affects corporate profits, and we've been in an earnings recession globally for over 2 years now. So that is the fundamental shortfall that challenges equity markets.
If that's our fundamental shortfall, are you an advocate of more negative rates from the Bank of Japan? Are you an advocate? Do you think, are you a believer, not a Justin Bieber fan, but are you a believer in terms of more negative rates and more quantitative easing for growth?
I'll tell you what the real problem is with central banks. And that is that the old formula of quantitative easing is pretty tired. It doesn't shock in all the markets. I think we desperately need a new dose of, I would call it QE innovation. Maybe Mr. Draghi will come up with it.
But what is that? What is that?
A QE innovation would be some sort of globally coordinated stimulus. Maybe a globally coordinated government spending, infrastructure spending stimulus financed by the central bank. So the central bank writes checks, but some sort of global stimulus to boost growth. Governments don't want to take this additional spending on their own books because, as we know, public debt is maxed out in too many countries. So we still need to rely on the central banks to deliver that stimulus. But arguably now we need something more coordinated, and we need something a bit better than just buying government bonds.
I hear you, and we've got a G20 coming up.
That's the sort of occasion at which perhaps we could deliver something. I think there's a clear need for it.
Tapan, we're in a race to the bottom. We're in a race to the bottom in currencies.
There is an element of that.
How in the name of goodness, then, do you think that they could go for something as radical as the new New Deal? Essentially, what you're talking about is a New Deal, isn't it?
And the need for coordination is exactly that, because we must move away from what are at least perceived beggar thy neighbour policies. And that's what we've seen so much of over the last 5 years.
Give me some concept of a number, a bandwidth even, that G20 could invoke in terms of capital expenditure, a New Deal. Are you talking about infrastructure spending? Are you talking about roads, railways?
That's right. So, you know, Japan had this record of wasteful infrastructure spending in the 90s when it tried the fiscal stimulus route. It didn't particularly use QE at that point. But now we know that the developed world is short of infrastructure spending. Look at the state of US infrastructure. So we need something coordinated that delivers additional spending, because consumers sure are not spending that oil windfall they've just had.
Retail sales were grand. Retail sales were grand in the US on Friday. Apparently we're spending through. They are spending through. Excuse me.
But I think we've reached the point where some sort of coordinated attempt at reviving economies is needed.
In terms of the Japanese, I mean, there is this almost baying for blood at the moment for the Japanese. If we don't get a G20 solution, I mean, this is the volatility. This is the volatility on Japanese equities. And we are surging, the highest level in volatility in Japanese equities since 2011, since the quake in 2011. The market is baying for blood in terms of what the Japanese should deliver. What can they deliver in this interim before this coordinated, as it were, stimulus that you're calling for?
Well, they can press on more strongly with structural reforms, but the payoffs don't come immediately. They can pray and hope that the Chinese economy stabilizes, which would help, because that's been a clear a detrimental effect on Japan. There are things that they can hope for and work for, but you know what? The problem is that the underlying policy levers are not at full strength. They can't be, with public debt sitting at 260% of GDP.